Hello everyone, we're live here at EPA Studios. We're going to be talking about the 2000. Hello, we're going to be talking about the 2024 presidential election. I'm going to be taking any questions and answer type of things, so you can definitely ask any Q&As. As well as that, we're going to be really talking about the 2024 election. We're going to be talking about the Senate, presidential, and House elections. So that's going to be pretty exciting for this moment in time. Just give me a minute or so. I'm going to set everything up. Hello. I'm just going to be setting everything up for a second. Settings. I'm going to set up the audio appropriately. Okay, so if there's any questions you guys have about the election, feel free to talk about it right now. I'm going to start presenting soon. So, okay, let's talk about it. We're about 4 days away from the presidential election, and we have, of course, the Senate, the presidential election, as well as some of the numbers I want to be going through. So, I haven't been very active over the past 5 days or so, and what I've been seeing here on at least Polymarket is that Trump has pretty much dropped quite a bit from at his peak of 67% or so to down to about 58% or so, but he's still far ahead. If you look at the early voting, though, that is much more optimistic for the Republican Party. Back in 2020, I believe, early voting gave the Democratic Party about a 7 to 8% edge. But at this moment in time, the Republican Party is only down by 1%. If you look at the swing states here, Arizona, Republicans are up 7% in Arizona. That's about 4% better than 2020. Now, if you look at the state of Nevada, again, you see a very similar scenario here. Republicans are up 4%, while Democrats are supposedly in 2020 up by about 5% there in early voting. Okay, just setting up some technical things here. If you look at the poly market, if you look at the early voting results here, this election is tracking much more similarly to the 2024 election, a 2022 election, as opposed to the 2020 election. In 2022, at this moment in time, 50 million people casted their ballots, while in 2020, 99 million people actually casted their ballots. That's a pretty big difference from 2024, where only about 63 million people have actually casted their ballots early or in the mail. Now, I think what's quite interesting about this is that in 2020 there was a pandemic. People were voting much more in early and in person. So 2024 turnout is going to be pretty high. Is there any questions? I don't know what that is, but I'm gonna be dealing with that later. I assume. But anyhow, I have to talk about the election results here because I don't have that much more time. If you look at early voting, right? If you guys have again any questions, be sure to post it in the chat. But if you look at the swing states, if you look at Nevada again, I talked about it. Republican +4. In 2020, this was Democrat +3. In Arizona, it was Democrat +3 on election day 2020. Republicans are +7. If you look at Georgia here, this is more optimistic for Democrats, but again, as more early votes do end up coming in later later on, um, you're gonna see the Republican share probably increase because the closer the ballot is casted on election day, the more favorable it is for the Republican Party. So it's pretty interesting if you look at these numbers here for the Democratic Party. 3.8 million people have actually already casted their ballots. That's really high for Georgia because in 2020, only about 5 million people actually casted their ballots from the start of early voting up until all the votes on election day. This is a pretty high turnout from the state of Georgia. If you go to North Carolina here, again, pretty high turnout, 3.8 million votes. About 5.5 million was cast in 2020. Republicans and Democrats are tracking quite even. However, in 2020, Democrats were outnumbering Republicans significantly in North Carolina if you look at the early voting. Now we look at the three crucial battleground states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and they really don't tell you a lot. If you look at Wisconsin here, others outnumber Democrats and Republicans sizably. That doesn't really tell you as much. If you look at the state of Michigan here, Republicans and Democrats are essentially tied. That's not good news for Democrats because Democrats are generally ahead by a substantial amount in terms of the early voting. The fact that Democrats are only up by 3%, that's not a good sign for the Democratic Party. In Pennsylvania, you see Democrats about 57 to 33. That might seem very promising for Democrats, especially compared to the other states. However, there's another problem for the Democratic Party in the state of Pennsylvania, being the fact that honestly, Democrats in 2020 had about a 70, I believe 75-25 edge in the early voting. This time around, they simply don't have this type of edge going into election day. Now, if you look at some of the other numbers here we've seen, Polymarket is showing that the Republican Party is doing essentially a lot worse than they were doing a week ago, at least according to Polymarket. However, Trump does still have a 58% chance, and Republicans and Kamala Harris has a 42% chance. Now, if you go to the Senate here, Republican chances of winning the Senate are very high, 90 to 10, 895 to 105. Right? You look at the different scenarios. Democrats apparently can hit 53 seats, but the Republican Party is projected to hold most likely 52 seats, which I think is a fair estimate, and then 51 or 53. Right now, what looks like to be some of the most competitive races, we have in Ohio, Sherrod Brown versus Bernie Monrito. That is a very competitive race. If you go to Pennsylvania here, Bob Casey versus Dave McCormick. That's also a pretty competitive race. In Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin and Eric Hovde. That's also an interesting race to talk about. If you look at some of the other races here that I wanted to talk about in Texas here, Ted Cruz versus Colin Allred. Allred does seem like he is down by quite a bit in that race. So in terms of the most competitive races, probably if you're talking about this, the state of Ohio is probably the most contested race with Bernie Monrito versus Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown has a 55% chance according to 538, but their model is oftentimes inaccurate. If you look at 2020, they gave Joe Biden about a 90% chance of victory. They gave him like a 40% chance in Texas, and obviously that did not happen. Now, in the state of Ohio, if you look at Polymarket, that's not the right market, I believe. Ohio Senate. Bernie Monrito, 52%. Sherrod Brown, 48% in that race. If you look at some of the other competitive races in this election, you're going to see um, probably outside of Ohio, the most competitive race right now, according to the numbers, probably in Wisconsin, between Tammy Baldwin and Eric Hovde. Baldwin is the favorite. She won re-election in 2020 by a margin of roughly 10 points, I believe. And that was a really good margin. However, this time around, it does look like this race is more competitive. I believe just a few weeks ago, numbers had this at like 90 to 10 or something. And she was expected to win by a likely margin. But this time around, the race is far more competitive. If you look at the state of Pennsylvania here, Bob Casey, an institution in the state, is now fighting for his political life. He's at 73% chance of victory. Dave McCormick at 27, according to 538. In reality, I would actually put this at about tilt Democrat. I think that Bob Casey will probably win by a point or so. It's going to be a very competitive race. I think that they're honestly overestimating Bob Casey. You're not going to see that much of a split ticket in the Senate elections. If you look at the state of Michigan here, Elisa Slotkin against Mike, I believe Mike Rogers in the state of Michigan. That's also going to be a very competitive race. If this race goes for the Republican Party, Democrats are game over. In fact, in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, if any of these three states goes for the Republican Party in the Senate, Democratic chances in the Senate are 0%. They're not going to win the Senate or retain it at all. Now, for the Republicans, they do have like two or three races that are they do have to defend. The most competitive Republican race the Republican Party has to defend is probably, if you look at it, the state of Texas. Ted Cruz versus Colin Allred. Cruz is definitely not the most likely incumbent. Allred is an okay challenger. The problem for the for the Democratic Party in this race, you're not going to see Donald Trump winning the state by like 78%, while Colin Allred also winning the race simultaneously. You're probably not going to see that happening. Ted Cruz is not popular, but he's probably still going to end up winning. If you look at the second most competitive race, most people are saying it's going to be the state of Nebraska, where Deb Fisher is fighting for her political life against independent Dan Osborne. Osborne is pretty popular for a non-Republican in Nebraska. His favorability rating is very high, but guess what? His chances of actually winning the seat is probably very low. If you look at the state of Florida here, Rick Scott against Debbie McCarthy-Powell. This race is rated as well as that in the like Republican column, with McCarthy-Powell having about an 18% chance of victory. The problem for the Democratic Party in this race, Trump is going to win Florida easily. Scott is not the most disliked incumbent. There's no factors that would suggest that the Democrats are favored to win this race. Okay, what about Arizona? If you look at the state of Arizona here, you will see that Carrie Lake versus Ruben Gallego. I think Gallego is favored if you ask me, because Carrie Lake is not the most popular candidate. She lost against Katie Hobbs back in 2022. And guess what? She's just not very popular. Katie Hobbs is someone who is who essentially stayed in her basement, did not campaign, didn't even debate Carrie Lake. She was a ultra weak candidate. People had no faith in her. Democrats I talked to said that she was not going to win, and guess what? She pulled out a 0.4% chance of percentage point victory or so. That was very surprising. If Carrie Lake does not even win that race, I don't know how she's going to beat Ruben Gallego, who is definitely too far left for most Arizona voters. But against Carrie Lake, he probably does have a pretty good shot. If you look at Nevada here, Jackie Rosen against Sam Brown. At one point, I had this race as to Republican, but I think right now, it's probably most prudent to say that this race is leaning towards the Democratic Party. The reason is very simple. Sam Brown is not that strong of a candidate. Jackie Rose is someone who's not really in the news cycle a lot. She's not frequently associated with the mainstream Democratic Party, and that's going to help her because Joe Biden's probably going to end up losing the state. And if she can distance herself from Joe Biden, her chances are much better, and I think she'll be able to do that. And there any other questions y'all want me to take, or do you want me to talk about the presidential race? I think most people are here for probably the presidential race, and I do think that ultimately, when you look at these races, you look at the presidential race. Donald Trump, I think, is heavily favored. I think the most likely scenario is probably Trump at 312 electoral college votes, Ed Harris at 226. I think that most likely you're going to see the Republican Party win all the swing states. We're talking Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, and Nevada. I think all of those states will go for Donald Trump. Um, Michigan's by far the closest of those states. If you look at Poly Market, Harris right now has about I believe 59-60% chance of winning the state of Michigan. Wisconsin is about 55-45 in favor of Harris. But again, those are actually very slim margins for something like Poly Market. That's simply because if you look at Poly Market, generally in 2020, I believe it was around almost 90-10 in favor of Biden. So these slim margins, they really don't mean a lot. If you look at the Sunbelt states here, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, those states are about 70-30 in favor of Trump. That's a pretty good margin. If you look at the House of Representatives, Republicans 52% chance, Democrats 48% chance. Um, I would say that the House is probably the most competitive. I think that Trump has a very good chance in the presidential election, and I think that even for generously wording this for the Democratic Party, I think that the Democrats' chances of winning the Senate are slim because it kind of depends on John Tester winning in the state of Montana. And if you look at the odds here, Tester has a 9% chance of defeating Tim Sheehy as an incumbent. That is definitely not good news for him. If you want to look at the House of Representatives elections, if you look at that, Republicans are probably, according to 538, going to win about 219 seats. Ultimately, what's going to decide the Senate, the House elections would probably be California. I'm just going to have a sip of water. Anyhow, you're going to see that a few of the races that are really competitive are going to be in the states of New York and California, two deeply blue states that will decide who wins the House elections. So if you look at California here, whoever wins California will be dependent. Whoever wins the House will probably be dependent on California. If you look at the state of California in general, the most competitive races here are California's 22nd congressional district, where Democratic challenger Rudy Salas is facing David Valadao, the Republican incumbent, for a third time. This was a district that Joe Biden won by 10% of against Donald Trump. The problem is Valadao is very moderate, and he does sometimes side with the Democratic Party. He voted to impeach Donald Trump, the Republican president at the time, and that really does solidify his chances of winning. If you go to the 27th district, George Whiteside, the Democrat, appears to have a better chance than Mike Garcia, the Republican incumbent. Mike Garcia voted to overturn the 2020 presidential election results. He's also in a district that Joe Biden won by 10%, so that could be a problem for him. He is probably, in my opinion, going to narrowly lose that district, but California is going to take a long time to count their ballots, and I think this district will be decided 7 or 8 days after the presidential election, if not longer. So another district that's very competitive is California's 13th district. Republican incumbent John DeRate is facing Democratic challenger Adam Gray. This does not seem to be a race where Republicans are going to hold on. John DeRate is not nearly as popular as some of the other Republican incumbents in California who are in safe blue or likely blue Democratic districts. It's going to be very difficult for John DeRate to hold on, but that doesn't really matter. In the 41st district, Ken Calvert is facing Democrat Rollins. I forgot what Rollins, but anyways, the 41st district, Ken Calvert, 68% chance. The Democrat here, 32% chance. This was a district that voted for Donald Trump, so Democratic chances of actually winning this district is not that good. I think Harris will lose the district by 5, and I think that Ken Calvert will probably win the district by a similar margin of about 5%. If you look at the 45th district, Michelle Steele, I believe, will hold on against the Democratic incumbent. I don't know why it's 51-49. Honestly, I think it's going to be closer to 70-30. In my opinion, I think that the Republican chances of holding on to this district are still very good. If you look at the other state that's going to decide who wins the Senate, it's probably going to be the state of New York. Not Senate, but the House. The few competitive districts here, the first competitive one held by a Democrat. The only competitive district held by a Democrat is held by Democrat, uh, I believe, Democrat Pat Ryan. He's facing Republican. I actually forgot. Oh no. Anyways, I forgot who the Republican challenger is in this district. However, is raised in likely Democrat. You're probably going to see Pat Ryan holding on. He was the only Democrat who held on in the 2022 semi-Republican wave, at least in the House. Republicans were able to flip quite a few districts, most notably a few in New York. In the 22nd district here, the Republican incumbent Brandon Williams is heavily favored to lose his district against the Democratic Party. This was a district that voted for Joe Biden by 78%, plus the fact that the Republican incumbent Brandon Williams isn't even that popular. In fact, I believe the Democrats actually won this district by probably double digits. And Brandon Williams is a pretty bad incumbent, so he's not that popular in his district. That's going to be a problem for him. On the 19th district, I believe the Republican incumbent Molinaro with the incumbency advantage will probably hang on, though it's still going to be very tough to predict that state. You look at the first district here, longtime CNN anchor and Democrat John Avlon probably and most likely will not defeat Republican Nick Lolona, but Avlon does have a 14% chance of victory. Still, I'd say his chances are fairly slim. If you look at the fourth district here, Republican incumbent D'Esposito, he's probably not going to hang on. This is a district that voted for Biden by double digits. It's going to be very hard for the Republican Party to actually hang on in a presidential year, unless, of course, Donald Trump is able to make major inroads in the state of New York. Anyways, I'm a bit sick, but I'm still going to be doing the stream nevertheless. You look at some of the other states here. In Arizona, you have two competitive districts. In the first district, David Streicher, that's a Republican incumbent who defeated a Democrat in that district by like 0.3 in 2020. This will be an ultra competitive race, but nevertheless, I believe this is a race where Republicans will hang on, as well as Watson Somani, a more moderate incumbent, probably going to hang on in Arizona's 6th district as well. Now, Democrats, they're not actually defending that many seats. If you look at Ohio, there's a few competitive districts in Ohio, but Marcy Captor, Greg Landsman, as well as Skies, I forgot who that is. Anyhow, these three incumbents are probably going to hang on. Pennsylvania, there's two very important districts because it also deals with the presidential election. Susan Wild in the 7th district, as well as Matthew Cartwright in the 8th district, but they're both expected to hang on. I expect Matthew Cartwright to lose because not Joe Biden, Kamala Harris is going to lose that district by like 5 on the presidential level. I think it's going to be difficult for Cartwright to actually hang on, but we'll have to see. In the Alaska at-large district, Mary Peltola, her chances are not that good, 40-60, with Nick Begich as the favored. Nick Begich did not make it into the ranked choice round in 2022, I believe. Yeah, 2022, he was not able to make it into the ranked choice round. And what happened was that the Republican in that district, uh, I Sean McCain's 2008 running mate. My brain is not functioning today, but John McCain's 2008 running mate, she was not able to defeat Mary Peltola. She actually was down by quite a significant margin. Okay. So Alaska, this one, I think the Democratic Party will probably win this district, unlike what 538 predicts. And when you look at everything, I think that the Republicans will probably win like 222, like they are right now. I think that 538 is overestimating the Democratic Party's chances in California and New York. But I think that Democrats will probably hang on in the state of Alaska, and I think they might be able to hang on in the 7th and the 8th district in the state of Michigan. The Senate 90-10 in favor of the Republicans. That's not too surprising, I would say. Again, if you look at the presidential one, um, that's that's pretty competitive according to 538. I do still think that Trump will probably win the presidential election. Right now, the 538 says the electoral college 270 to 268. If you look at their individual state characterizations, they have Pennsylvania as tilting towards Trump. They have North Carolina, Georgia, and Nevada as leaning towards Trump. And they have Nevada as tilting towards Trump, while the states of Wisconsin and Michigan have the state as tilting towards Kamala Harris. That's kind of what they predict. And if you look at poly market here, I'm just gonna this is actually a race that many people are having a fuss about. In the state of Nebraska, the Senate race there, Republican Deb Fisher and uh Republican Deb Fisher and Independent Dan Osborne. Many people say Osborne has a good chance of winning, but honestly, I think that this will not be a competitive race. I think Deb Fisher will win by like 10%. What are some other questions here? Pennsylvania will be competitive. What do you think? Of course, Pennsylvania will be a competitive race. I believe that right now, Pennsylvania is probably going to go for the Republican Party by about 1 to 2%. That's my best guess. Probably closer to 2. If you look at early voting, that's not good news for Democrats. If you look at party registration, Democrats have lost like 300,000 voters compared to 2020, while Republicans have gained about 400,000 voters in terms of party registration. Now, of course, a lot of those registered Democrats were probably voting Republicans anyways in 2020 and 2022 before they switched their registrations. But nevertheless, I still believe that the Democratic Party is pretty doomed in the state of Pennsylvania as of right now. Again, a lot of those white working class voters, Harris is actually doing fairly well for a Democrat, at least compared to Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden with white non college educated voters. At least that's according to polling, but I really don't buy those estimates. I think that they are skewed estimates at the end of the day, and I think that there's no reason for Kamala Harris to be doing that well with white working class voters, especially because she's apparently doing better than Joe Biden among that group of voters. And I think that there's probably some type of miss in terms of the actual polling, as well as some of the numbers as well. So if you look at some of the other states here in terms of the total numbers, 66 million votes have been tabulated. I just believe that these are not good numbers for Democrats. They need to be up by at least about 5% to say that they have any, to be favored to actually win in the presidential election. And again, if you look at probably the most obvious example of that, North Carolina, that's horrible news for the Democratic Party. Democrats led so much in. I'm just gonna click North Carolina. Democrats were ahead by Democrats were actually ahead by so much in the early slash middle ballots in 2020 in North Carolina, but now it's kind of 50-50, and that's definitely not good news for the Republican Party. For the Democratic Party, sorry. Okay. Also, I'm gonna deal with the copyright strike after the stream. I didn't actually know there was gonna be a copyright strike. I just thought the video was gonna get removed, but anyhow, I'm gonna deal with that later. Um, okay. Is there any more topics y'all want me to cover? Honestly, looking at 538, I think that they should shift their model about 1 to 2 points in favor of Trump, and then I would find it more personally more agreeable. But again, they have the right to do whatever they want. If you look at some of the other races here, in the state of Ohio, Sherrod Brown, Bernie Monrito. I don't know why they had it at 51-48 for a day. That doesn't make much sense, but whatever. Honestly, I think the if Democrats want to win, yeah, I think if Democrats want to win the Senate, they have to bang on, Colin Allred winning in Texas, and that's all but impossible at this moment in time. There's pretty much no way that at this point, there's probably no way that Colin Allred would win in the state of Texas, and with that goes any chances of Democrats actually winning in the state of Texas or the presidential election. polling average, predicted polling average, fundamentals, expert ratings, full forecast. Honestly, the problem with 538 is that they factor polls way too much. I don't actually think there's much for me to talk about. I really just believe that the Republicans will probably win a trifecta. I think Trump's chances are probably, if you ask me, about 70-30. I want to look at this Minnesota or Virginia. Uh, Minnesota or Virginia. Earlier in the cycle, we had a lot of maps with Virginia, but without Minnesota. I personally think Minnesota will probably be more competitive. The reason being that I think people overestimate the effect of Tim Walz. That's just simply because, again, Tim Walz won his governor re-election bid by about 8%. That's not actually all that convincing. Josh Shapiro outperformed Joe Biden by 15 points. In Michigan, the Democratic governor there, Gretchen Whitmer, outperformed Joe Biden by 7 points. You go to, some of the other races here. In Ohio, for example, the Republican governor there, Mike DeWine, overperformed Donald Trump by like 10 points. So Tim Walz is not actually that popular of a governor, probably because he's way too far left wing. And what you're gonna see is that Minnesota's not gonna be all that competitive either. But I think that Virginia was a state that voted for Joe Biden by 10. I really don't think it's gonna be that competitive. But Minnesota, I think that could reasonably go to the Republican Party. Tim Walz is pretty far left, although he does have that everyman type of appeal. What you're gonna see is that Kamala Harris is not gonna do all that well with suburban voters. And also, there's a lot of young college voters who will not be keen to support her because of what happened in the Israel-Hamas war. Furthermore speaking, I just don't think that honestly, Tim Walz has that good of an appeal, and Harris has that good of an appeal with white, not college educated voters. I'm a bit sick. I apologize for that. Is there any other questions y'all want me to answer? Because this is more of a dedicated question-based stream as opposed to a actual general election coverage-based stream. So I'm gonna fill in the Senate map and the presidential map based on my current projections. For the Democratic Party, I think this is pretty fair. You're gonna see these states go for Democrats by safe margins. Minnesota's probably gonna be likely. I don't think that the Amy Klobuchar's gonna win by safe margin necessarily, but I think likely is pretty fair estimate. Um, you're gonna see Nebraska's special. I think Nebraska's at large probably be about Republican plus 10, so that's gonna be about a likely characterization. Montana's probably gonna be like Sheehy plus 7 or so. You're not gonna see that many split ticket voters. You're gonna see Texas and Florida probably be likely Republican. Ted Cruz is definitely not the most popular Republican, but yeah, Tim Walz is not that popular. Walz, honestly, Walz is okay in terms of popularity. His popularity is much better than Kamala Harris. But at the same time, just because someone is, a VP choice doesn't mean that they're gonna have that big of an impact. And also in Minnesota, again, he didn't overperform by that much. Many governors they overperform their their top of the ticket, for example, Senate and presidential counterparts. For example, you see there's a Democratic governor in the state of Kansas. There's a Republican governor in There was a Republican governor, of course, in the states of Maryland and Massachusetts, and there's a Republican governor, Kristen Sununu, in New Hampshire, who won re-election by 15%. So I don't think Walz is all that popular in Minnesota or will make all that big of an impact. You look at Poly Market, popular vote rise, probably Kamala Harris is still going to win. I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, Big states like California and New York will still come home for Kamala Harris. I think that's pretty obvious, honestly. look at some of the other ones. So I think that honestly, we can say that these will not be competitive races. West Virginia is probably gonna go for the Republican candidate by at least like 30 points. Chief Justice won't have a competitive race against Glenn Elliott. I think that's pretty fair to say. Ohio, I think right now leaning towards Bernie Moreno. Sherrod Brown is popular. Sherrod Brown has that, working class appeal. He has those connections. But guess what? It's not going to help you if Donald Trump wins the state by 10% or more, which is what I predict will happen. You're probably going to see Michigan and Pennsylvania going for the Democratic Party. Elisa Hawkins pretty popular in Wisconsin. Uh, if you look at Pennsylvania here, the Democratic incumbent in that race, whose name I actually forgot because I'm a bit sick and I don't remember much. Bob Casey, right? Bob Casey. I honestly think that Bob Casey is not all that popular in the state of Pennsylvania. I know that is not that hot of an opinion. People generally think that Bob Casey is a very good situation. The problem is if you look at his debate performance against Dave McCormick, the Republican, he didn't do all that well. He did quite miserably, in my opinion. In fact, if you look at his debate performance, every single time um, Dave McCormick brought out an issue, he seemingly just talked about how Bob Casey was essentially a hedge fund manager and how he was unsuitable to be senator. Well, that could be an argument you kind of pose for one or two times in Pennsylvania. If you just keep saying that 50 times, it's not going to really help your case as to why you will be an effective senator as opposed to your opponent. So I think that was not necessarily the best play from him. If you look at Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin's still decently popular. She won re-election by 11 in 2018. The problem is, again, split ticket voting is quite rare these days, and Trump will probably win the state of Wisconsin, in my opinion. But if, of course, if Democrats are able to win Wisconsin on a presidential level, it's going to be game over for Eric Hovde. There's no doubt about that. Tammy Baldwin will probably overperform Joe Biden by about 2%. But then again, the question is that going to be enough? I think it's going to be enough, but we'll have to wait and see. If you look at the state of Arizona here, um, the Democrat in that race, Ruben Gallego, is being challenged by Carrie Lake. Again, I've explained Lake is not all that popular. Her election denialism is not popular in Arizona. Many Republican voters I know in Arizona who are more moderate are actually backing Ruben Gallego despite his more, socialist type of touch and the fact that he's far more liberal than most Arizona's can accept. The fact that the other candidate is someone called Carrie Lake is definitely turning down a lot of these Republican voters that are more moderate, and you're going to see Ruben Gallego winning the state of Arizona, in my opinion. Nevada, Jackie Rosen, again, she's not in the spotlight a lot, which is probably beneficial if you're in a state that Donald Trump's going to win by like 2 to 3%, in my opinion. And I think that Jackie Rosen will be able to win by about 2 to 3%. So even if Democrats win Ohio hypothetically, Republicans still win the Senate. And there's really no other state that's all that competitive. Are you doing a live stream election day too? I'm sorry, but I'm gonna be busy on that day, and I don't think I could do a live stream immediately. But a few hours after votes begin tabulating, I'll try and do a stream. Is there any more questions? If so, just tell me. Again, I'll try to do my best to cover the election, but there's some things that unfortunately don't have the time to do. Presidential. I'm just gonna fill that map in as well. So these are some of the safe states. There's really not much commentary when you're just filling a bunch of safe states. Again, this is just my prediction. It might not be right as everything turns out, but that's gonna be what I think. So South Carolina's probably gonna be safe. Texas probably likely. I'm gonna get rid of these swing states. West Virginia is gonna be safe. Virginia is probably gonna be likely. I think Minnesota will probably be lead. Alaska will probably be. I think it's likely because there's a competitive House race there. I'm looking at more comments. How much do you think Nevada will be? If you look at the 2022 midterms, right, the Democrats' Steve Sisolak lost to Joe Lombardo by about 1.5%. Hispanic voters are moving heavily away from Kamala Harris. I think a 2 to 3% margin in favor of Donald Trump will probably be the most accurate estimate, though it probably at the end of the day will be on the lower side of that, just because Biden did win the state by 2.4%. I think anything more than a 5% trend is probably a bit too much to say, but I think that probably Trump plus 2 margin is pretty fair. I think it would have been at around a 5. It peaked like 2 months ago. I think 2 months ago when Biden was still the nominee, it probably would have been Trump plus 5, Trump plus 6, but Joe Biden is no longer the nominee. Kamala Harris is definitely not super popular in Nevada. But again, a super large shift within a few years, I don't think that's gonna necessarily occur. I think that you're probably gonna see like a 5% shift, but I don't think you're gonna see a 5% win for Trump. If you look at early voting, it's pretty abysmal for the Democrats in the state of Nevada. And it's not necessarily that crucial of a state. Again, it's 3 days away from November 5th. It's not all that crucial of a state. 6 electoral college votes, if we map it out here. We're gonna do that, of course. So let's assume Democrats win Nebraska second. That might not happen, but I think that's a pretty fair guess to say. If Democrats win the Rust Belt states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, they win New Hampshire, boom, they win the presidency. They don't really need the state of Nevada. For Donald Trump, he also doesn't really need Nevada. He needs to win Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, and he wins the presidency. Nevada's not all that important, honestly. I think again, all the other if you actually map everything out, you're gonna see that Nevada doesn't matter in most combinations. There are some combinations where Nevada does matter. For example, I don't know if Kamala Harris wins Michigan, which is probably her best state. She could win a state like Georgia and then kind of carry Nevada and Arizona. That's a possible way to say Nevada could be pretty could be imperative to her Kamala Harris's chances. You could see Nevada, Arizona, Michigan go for Kamala Harris, but even if she wins Wisconsin, she's still short if she doesn't win Pennsylvania, North Carolina, or Georgia. Again, I just don't think Nevada's actually all that important to a Kamala Harris victory. Any other questions? Because if not, I'm probably going to record a video where a lot more people are going to watch it, honestly, and it's going to be much more useful than actually a stream where I'm just repeating what I'm saying. Any other questions? How does Harris have 11% in your poll? People have different opinions, right? Some people think, Harris might win. Some people think Trump might win. It depends. 11% is actually quite low. If you look at Poly Market, like 40% betters. Again, 40% doesn't include any Americans. Technically, Americans are not allowed to bet on Poly Market, but people have different opinions, and some people still think Harris is going to win. Yeah, you should probably do a video on that. Pretty fair, I think. Again, people have different opinions. Some people think Harris might win. You see a lot of some of these historians, Alan Lichtman, someone who did predict 9 of the 10 presidential elections, has a 90% accuracy rate. He says that Joe Biden was going to win if he was the Democratic nominee, and he says that Kamala Harris would win if she's the Republican nominee. If she's a Democratic nominee, again, I respect that. I don't agree, but then again, I don't have a great track record, and I really don't have any type of track record whatsoever. So I don't think I have the right. I do have the right to criticize him, but I'm not going to do that. I still think that Donald Trump is a heavy favorite. You look at polling, you look at betting markets, you look at everything. Trump, I think, is pretty fairly the favorite to win. If you look at the Senate too, the Republicans have a pretty good chance in the Senate. Any other questions or comments? I'm going to respond to them. I'm probably going to leave by around 9 because by then there's probably not much for me to say. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, of course, because I'm gonna be because again, 5 days till the election. There's a lot of things to analyze. So my prediction, probably Michigan. Michigan's definitely the closest one of them all. North Carolina, I think, is leaning Republican. Georgia's probably leaning Republican. Arizona, Nevada, you look at the early voting in Nevada and Arizona, those are consistently with leaning Republican characterizations. Georgia has the probably the best numbers of any of these states for the Republican Party. Republicans have and for the Democratic Party, if you look at early voting, 3.8 million votes casted. Democrats actually seem put in to be in a pretty solid position, but there's still election day voting, which will favor Republicans. If you look at North Carolina, again, the early voting, they're pretty miserable for the Democrats. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, the early votes are not very definitive. Pennsylvania especially, Democrats vote heavily early and by mail, and Republicans come up heavily on election day. Remember, Trump was up by like a million votes on the election day vote, and then his lead just shrunk and absolutely collapsed back in 2020. And we're going to see that again. I think that you're going to see Trump up by like between half a million and 1 million votes on election on with the election day batch. And then what you're going to see is that Kamala Harris gradually try and catch up with the early and election a mail-in vote. Will that be enough? We don't know. But I think Pennsylvania probably about Republican plus two. Wisconsin, I'd still say about Republican plus one. And Michigan's going to be the closest of them all, in my opinion. You look at Poly Market, Trump. I'm just going to pull it up right now. So, Michigan, yeah, Kamala Harris is at 57. Donald Trump is at 43. Even then, that's not actually that big of a gap. I still think Michigan's totally Republican. 43% is still pretty high. Again, 43% just means that essentially you're spitting a again it's the same as grabbing 100 here's a bag of 100 numbers. If you grab between 1 and 57, Harris wins. If you grab 58 to 100, Trump wins. That's not actually that big of a difference. Any other questions? I mean, I really don't know what to talk about at this point. I might just end the stream now because there's really not much to analyze. I think I've gone through it all. Early voting so far looks pretty promising for Republicans and the Sun Belt, of course. And the Rust Belt, it's hard to really tell all that much. It does seem like women are voting at a much higher rate than males, which is a good sign for the Democratic Party. But other than that, it does not look too good for Democrats. And I'd much rather be Donald Trump than be Kamala Harris at this point. I think right now of course, the most likely way for Kamala Harris to win the presidential election, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Well, for Donald Trump, it would probably be winning Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. I think that's pretty much a consensus for everyone. I'm gonna look at the comments. Brother, can you reply me on email? I'll look at my email. I haven't looked at it today, but I'll see. I might just end the stream. I don't think there's much to talk about. I think I'm better off recording a video where more people will end up seeing it. So, bye bye, guys. If you don't have any questions for the last 30 seconds, I'm just going to end the stream. So, going to do a 30-second count off before I leave. Any other comments, any other questions, I'm going to reply. But other than that, I'm going to say goodbye. Also, if there's anything I did not, if there's anything you missed, you can always look at the replay. Bye bye.